Mhm.
So the waiting room is disabled, so people can just join when they come. And I do want to honor your time. We have a lot to go through and discuss and cover tonight. So let's just get started. My name is Kim Cockcroft. I'm the Minister for Faith Formation at Grace Church, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you all tonight, and a privilege to be here with you and to be with our wonderful facilitators tonight. I'm going to quickly introduce our facilitators to you. They'll be taking different parts of the evening, but I want you to be familiar with their faces. And then Maggie Finley, who's here too, will lead us in prayer. So the first person I'd like to introduce you to is Johanna Munson. And instead of giving people's background, I've just asked them to say a few things about themselves. So go ahead, Johanna.
Thank you, Kim. And thank you all for being here this evening. You are demonstrating quite a bit of courage in taking part in this series. I have been on the island since 2004 and have done various jobs. I've been a life coach, but recently it all sort of came together in this desire to bring the topic of death to people and make it more comfortable to talk about. I'll give some background on why I decided to do that. But there's really, there's resistance to talking about the topic. And certainly when I was growing up, we know my family never talked about it. And so I have designed an online course called the End of Life Peace Plan. John McKenzie has been a huge help in helping me get the videos done for that. So thank you, John. And I just want to start conversations. And I am also a trained, what we call death doula, end of life doula. I love to do the planning part, talking about what we want for the end of our life. And then hopefully as COVID ends, I'll be able to get back to being with people in person and with families as they support their loved ones through the dying process. So, thank you.
Thanks, Johanna. I'd like to introduce Jeff Bazet next.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jeff, and my wife Shannon is also in the meeting. That's her. So we are new to Grace Church since about June of this year, just moving up from the Southern California area, and delighted to be here. And for the last 10 years, I've been working as the Director of Spiritual Care and hospital chaplain in a hospital context in Southern California. So you can imagine the conversations I've had with families over a 10-year period. And then for 20 years before that was in ministry, leading churches and starting churches. And so I'm delighted to be here with you. I've done education on advanced directive documents, POLST documents in the hospital, in our community for years now. So, and I've helped dozens of people do them over the years. So shall I pass it to Shannon?
Yes, I was going to introduce Shannon separately, but Shannon Moore.
Hey, good evening. My background and interest in all of this is that I'm a palliative medicine physician and have been for a long time, which followed a career in ICU and third world medicine. And this is like being a fireman, all of us running into the fire instead of running away like we would normally run away from things that are scary. So as Johanna says, we are coming into the warmth and then the heat, and even there can be a burn in all of this conversation. So we're here with you and want to support this joyful process of becoming clear. And it's the most loving thing to do for yourself and your family for sure. So anyway, glad you're here. Glad I'm here too.
So we also have some other people from Grace who will introduce themselves as we go. And I'm so excited they're here. But let's go ahead and jump right in. Tonight, we have so much to cover, and it will be a mixture of presentations, and then we'll have 2 times to break into breakout rooms So please do text me if you have any questions or you're having any difficulty. And now I'd like to introduce Maggie Finley and thank her so much for starting us with prayer.
Just a word too. I'm happy to be here with you because I have done the work of hospice as a chaplain for several years. And so I'm excited about people having these conversations and happy to be a midwife to those who are making that transition and inviting people to use their imaginations, their holy imaginations as they begin to prepare the advanced work. Having said that, I want to invite all of us just to take a moment and a few breaths as we bring ourselves along with our frailty and our fear, our open ears and hands and hearts into the presence of a good and gracious God. As we begin to look at this very natural, very human experience of how we journey toward death. And as we begin to look closer at what is perhaps one of the most awesome in the pantheon of life's sacred mysteries, strengthen our beliefs that at life's conclusion, there is as much a beginning as an ending, trusting that our leaving is as much our own as is our living. Tonight, may we attend to our unique thoughts and feelings as we receive and unpack this information, honoring the subtlety and the soulful movements which allow us to discern what options are resonant with and authentic for each of us. Understanding that, as the late Washington State poet Jean Lohman so beautifully and gracefully suggests in Praise What Comes, at the end, there may be no answers and only a few very simple questions. Did I love? Finish my task in the world? Learn at least one of the many names of God? At the intersections, the boundaries where one life began and another ended, the jumping off places between fear and possibility, at the ragged edges, did I catch the smallest glimpse of the holy? And finally, may we see the wisdom of advanced planning as an act of love, realizing that our intentions, as much as is humanly possible, around this part of the passage, and using our self-awareness and holy imagination to prepare for our final letting go, is not only about a departure, but what I think we all believe to be the next part of our individual adventure. And also a significant part of our legacy of love. In gratitude and grace, let it be so.
And so it is.
Thank you so much, Maggie. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to Patty Malloy. Patty Malloy and Emily Chamberlain are co-leads for our spiritual discernment ministry at Grace.
Thank you, Kim. I'm Patty Malloy, and the screen name here says Marty Steyer because I'm with my dear husband here. And I just want to say thank you to the leaders for introducing this topic in such a life-giving way. I feel buoyed by your introductory remarks. And Maggie said something about we were here to discern things. And as we wade into this, we wanted to tell you about the spiritual discernment ministry at Grace. Emily, are you here? Is she here? Maybe just turn off your mic and say hello for a second. I can't see you, but Anyway, Emily and I facilitate this process, and I just wanted to take a minute because we thought perhaps participating in this program will raise new questions for you or leaving you wanting to explore questions further. And things might begin to bubble here, and they might over time become more clear or less clear, and you may want to explore it further. So from the outset, we wanted you to know that there's a resource at Grace called Spiritual Discernment. Dennis and Beulah brought this to Grace many years ago, and we're so deeply appreciative for their leadership. So what is spiritual discernment? Spiritual discernment is a process of identifying a question that is on your mind and heart and listening deeply and quietly to God, your inner truth, spirit, however you identify the higher power in your life. And then that listening is done in a supportive community here at Grace. We have a group of people that are specially prepared in discernment practices that help bring clarity around life's big and small questions. At the heart of the practice is holding a space to help a person discover the truth about their own situation. So how does it work? We start by inviting a person to identify a question that's on their mind or heart. And in the context of this program, it might be a question for ourselves, like, do I want to seek further treatment for my disease? Or now that I think about it, what are the advance directives that I want to leave regarding my care? Or your question might be about your parents or your loved ones. Is my mom still safe to live by herself? Or how can I have end-of-life conversations with my dad about his wishes? Or about my own wishes with my daughter? And we may start these conversations here, and you may want to continue in getting in touch with your questions. And so we just want you to know spiritual discernment is here to help you do just that. Once you have a focus question, we ask you to write a brief statement, share it with a team of trained people, and then we'll gather for a block of time. And now in COVID times, we imagine that gathering will be just like this. It'll be here on Zoom. So the team's role is to hold the space in prayer and listening so that the inner truth can arise from you, the focused person. And finally, I just want to mention that discernment can take other forms as well. We've learned that many times discernment begins the moment that the person steps forward with that question. And sometimes when they talk with me or Emily or another member of the team, they realize that the question has become clear. And we don't necessarily then have to gather for a discernment, but prayer and God have supported the focused person, which is exactly the intent of the ministry. So we just want you to know that we welcome the opportunity to hold these or other life questions for you in our virtual community. Again, no questions too big or too small. And so when the questions bubble up for you as you participate in the program, remember the support is here, and we'd be honored to hold the questions with you. My phone number is in the Grace directory, and so is Emily's, or feel free to ask Ren or Stephen or Kim for our contact information. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. I'm Emily. I won't add anything, but I just wanted to say that this ministry is so dear to my heart, and I feel more truly called to it than I would say anything at Grace. And, however the process unfolds, it's such a joy and a privilege to hold that prayerful space to amplify and clarify the focused person's inner truth. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Patty and Emily. And Johanna is going to take the next section of our evening.
All right. Did you want to outline the weeks, or are we gonna?
I think we'll do that at the end.
Okay, great. All right. Well, let's dive in then. I'd like to start with a reading, very short. So do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds and your minds in Christ Jesus. That's, of course, from Philippians, and I think it speaks to exactly what Patty was saying about this process of discernment. And if we don't ask the questions, how are we going to find the answers, right? So there's a lot of avoidance of the topic of death in American culture. Anytime we try to suppress that expression, if something we see as unpleasant, it's probably going to pop up in some other area of our life. So we get anxious about death and dying, and that can show up in ways like we try to hold on to our youth in unhealthy, inappropriate ways, or maybe we don't take action on our priorities, thinking that we have plenty of time, sort of denying the fact of death, or any number of other scenarios. So if we take the time to reflect on our life journey and discern our beliefs about what happens after death, and then to address how we wish to live out our last days through that actual death, we can find that peace which transcends understanding. I came to work in this field of end-of-life planning and death care through my experiences with death in my family. My father-in-law had lung disease and died at home under hospice care after several years of declining health. We gathered his children and wife, and many grandchildren were with him in the room when he took his last breath. That's what 75% of Americans say that they want. They want to die at home, but actually only about 20% are able to do that. His beloved wife died a few years later from an aneurysm that happened at the hospital, so she was put on life support right away. Even though she had no brain activity, she also didn't have an advance directive. And so that was what was the next step. A few days later, when we had all gathered, we decided to take her off life support, and she died shortly thereafter. That happened in New Orleans right before Hurricane Katrina. And so we had to evacuate, and we're not able to have a service until April. Not all of us were able to gather. So life can interfere with the best of laid plans. Right? So next to go was my mom. She was diagnosed with acute leukemia, and 5 weeks later, she was gone. She did choose to have chemotherapy with a 50-50 chance that it would extend her life, but she ended up in the ICU with pneumonia. She too was hooked up to all kinds of tubes, but nothing worked, and she was too weak to make the trip back to her home here on the island, which we assume would have been her preference. Again, she didn't have an advance directive. They were able to move her to the hospice floor in the hospital and remove all the tubes. And she was still on morphine for pain relief, and she died within a few hours. Much different experience with my dad. He soldiered on. He had a very strong heart and ate a healthy diet. So he kind of figured that the chances of having a life-ending heart attack or stroke were pretty small. And he was the one to initiate deep conversations about his end-of-life options with me and my sisters. In the last maybe 2 years of his life, he went through pretty serious physical decline, ending up in a wheelchair, and then went on hospice for the last 4 months of his life. But they were ready to reevaluate him at one point because he was doing so well. Hospice is just amazing. They take such good care of their patients and the families as well. So he had another fall and went downhill rapidly from that point and slipped away a week after what we call VSED, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. And that happened in his room, which he considered his home. He was living in an assisted living facility at that point. He was quite an introvert, and although we didn't discuss that particular part, if he would prefer to be alone or that my sisters and I be there when he died, we had the sense that he'd rather die alone. And so we spent days with him, but left every evening around 8 and telling him we loved him, and if he was ready to go, that was okay with us. And he died at 3:30 in the morning. So I share these stories to underline the critical nature of considering what our preferences are now while we are of sound mind, putting them down in writing, and engaging in conversations with those who need to know this information. I can summarize it as think, plan, and talk. We can share our thoughts and make plans with our family, with medical and legal professionals. We can get spiritual support. I very love what what Grace Community offers from churches and other institutions, and talk to our friends and neighbors as well. If we're able to create this circle of caring ahead of time, that can offer quite a bit of peace around the fact of our own death. And we'll be doing that in the course of these 4 sessions. So I wanted to share quickly some of the beliefs about what happens to us after death. This may be part of your discernment conversations if you want to take advantage of that service. And then we'll move to the concerns worksheet. And it's important to discern what we believe about what happens to us after death, because we may gain some serenity just from that. So the first belief is that there's nothing after death, that we are alive, and when our body stops working, that's it. And so there's really no reason to be afraid of death if that's your belief, because you're not going to have any conception of the fact that you're dead. Next belief is that some part of us continues after death, and we can call it the soul or spirit or essence or mind. And there's a possibility that what happens after death is either pleasant or not pleasant, depending on how we lived our life. And so that is a time when definitely talking to ministers and people with that background, the chaplains and so on, can be very helpful. Then there's the sort of universalist perspective, where everyone is beloved by God and there is some afterlife, but it is a positive experience. And then the last one is that some part of us continues, and if at some point we decide we want to, we can reincarnate and come back and live another life and learn more in that physical form. So just keep those in mind as you think about these concerns, and be willing to ask questions and look into those more. So now I'm going to share the concerns worksheet and talk about these issues that come up around death and dying. And just to share with you, I prefer to call them concerns and not fears. The word fear can really set off a fight or flight response in our brains and bodies. We can take action to address concerns. My hope is that you'll begin to see ways to do that while we're together. So I'm going to share my screen. Right there. All right, can everybody see that? Yeah? Okay,
Yes.
great. All right, so 7 concerns, and I'll mention which sessions that will sort of focus on these, but they really go throughout the whole workshop. So if it doesn't come up when you think it should, don't hesitate to bring it up. We'll be breaking out into groups, and please feel free to ask about any of these. So the first one is leaving loved ones, and this can be family members, it can be pets. We may have concerns about how well they'll be able to survive without us, whether it's financial or emotional. We may have the anticipatory grief of knowing that we might miss out on celebrations, birthdays and weddings and graduations, those kinds of things. And so we will be addressing this in sessions 3 and 4 with wills. And you can also do some memorial planning. There are lots of ideas for doing legacy projects writing letters to people to be opened on those special days. And so there are ways to alleviate this concern. Second one is dealing with others' pain. So what does death actually look like? I was very, very blessed to be in the room when several of my parents or in-laws died, and to be with them right after. With my dad, we went down as soon as we got the call that he had died, and we spent beautiful, beautiful time with his body. The Cook Family Funeral Home was wonderful with giving us the space to do that. And people are afraid of seeing a dead body. It's not common anymore. Before the Civil War, death happened at home, right? But then in the Civil War, the soldiers died far from home, and that's when the practice of embalming began, to bring those bodies back to the family home to be buried. And so that became the norm, and funeral homes took over the process of dealing with bodies. But it used to be taken care of in the home, and there were women who were special. They were doulas, basically, death doulas. So hospice care is wonderful for helping deal with pain. And in sessions 2 and 4, we'll be offering some ways to address that. Talking is one of the best way to deal with others. When you are actually dying, it takes a lot of work to die, and you want to be able to focus on that process yourself and not be worrying about what others are enduring. I mean, everybody will be in pain, whether it's emotional or physical, but it's important to take some time, take some space for yourself, and you can do that by planning with these tools we're offering. Next one is unfinished business, and I know many of us are at the point where maybe we're not working anymore. We've done our career work, and we are free to take on some of the more emotional work of living out the rest of our lives. Some of us are still creating and sharing our talents in many beautiful ways, and that doesn't end until we actually die. So by taking care of these aspects of our end of our lives, we can give ourselves that space to put energy towards things that are important to us that we maybe haven't gotten to yet. So that's, we can talk about that today, and also in sessions 3 and 4, we'll be addressing that. Dying alone. So we have this vision of, some of us have a vision of loved ones being around us, holding our hands as we breathe our last breath. And it can be a real deep fear that we might die without anybody there. With COVID, it's been heartbreaking to see how many people have had to undergo death without family members. Often the healthcare personnel are amazing in their capacity to be with people who are dying. But that is one thing we can do is create the circle of caring, so that we can, if family don't live nearby, we have people in our lives who maybe can be there with us. There's also a growing movement of death doulas coming into popularity and rebirthing that old tradition. And so if you're interested in that, look into maybe talking with somebody ahead of time about what that might look like. Addressed concerns about the afterlife with talking about this discernment process. And so I definitely encourage you to look into that if you have concerns about finding peace around what you think happens after death. Big one here is the loss of control, physical, mental, and emotional. This is where advanced directives are absolutely necessary, and we'll be discussing some of our values that will influence what we put in our advanced directives. So discussing our values today and talking about advanced directives next week. And there are wonderful resources out there. The End of Life Washington website is, the organization is amazing in the amount of material. And Jeff will be using some of those materials tonight, introducing them. Concerns about Alzheimer's and dementia are very, very prevalent. I know my dad experienced some Alzheimer's, and he didn't get to the point where he didn't recognize us, but sometimes he experienced a lot of confusion. You've probably heard of sundowning, where end of the day, things just don't make any sense anymore. And that's a really tough situation to endure. And then the last concern would be death itself is painful. And I'm so happy that we have Shannon here to share with us some about the experience of dying. From what I've read and research that I've seen, it looks painful, but it's not actually always painful, other than being, in a violent death. It's part of the process of our bodies shutting down, and it happens, sometimes happens quickly, sometimes happens slowly. When my dad decided to stop eating and drinking, it took about a week for him to die. And the whole time we were, using a little bit of spray or swabs on his mouth to keep him a little bit lubricated. But other than that, he didn't take in any nutrition, any liquids. And he had morphine to keep him comfortable, and anti-anxiety drug. So hospice does a wonderful job. If you don't want to be in pain, you don't have to be in pain if you go through hospice. And we look forward to hearing more about that from Jeff and Shannon. All right, I'm going to stop sharing here. All right, that was a lot of me talking. So thank you for your patience, but I wanted to just give a little bit more information about how each concern might show up and when we'll be looking at those concerns in the course of the workshops. All right, shall we go into our small groups?
Yes, and Johanna, do you want to give us some guidance as to what we'll be discussing in our small groups?
Yeah, so if you had a chance to print out the worksheet and you have any sense of what your top concerns might be, please feel free to share those. If not, just having listened to the 7 concerns, or maybe you've another one has come up that I didn't mention, feel free to bring those up. And it's not it's a time to explore those concerns and maybe hear how other people feel about them, if there have been any approaches that they've used that have helped them find some relief of that concern.
Great, thank you. You all will be invited to join a breakout room, and we'll have 10 minutes. So we'll meet back here at 7:45. If someone wants to keep time in your group so you're not surprised when you suddenly return, that's always a good idea. So stand by, and you'll be moved into rooms now.
presumably others will be joining us shortly.
Jeff, I wanted to say welcome to Grace.
Hey, thank you. How long have you been at Grace?
Let's see, I think about 15 years now.
Wow.
So,
We've been planning this for years, knowing we would come. We've been good friends with Dennis and Beulah for years. They're Shannon's godparents and adopted mom and dad. So we're delighted to finally be here now. I just wrapped up my chaplaincy work earlier this year, navigated the early stages of COVID and then kind of passed the baton, you know.
yeah. Glad you're here.
Yeah, I was curious how you find a church in a pandemic. It sounds like you had a pre-existing condition with Dennis and Beulah that helped you find it.
We've actually worshiped at Grace on and off over the last probably 5 years
Okay.
when we've been up visiting on vacation. So, but we never dreamed we'd step into Grace when Grace was not meeting, at least in person.
Yeah.
Thankful for Zoom though. Kim, I'm glad we didn't screw it up. We were like, I sure hope everybody joins us, or we went into some other space. I don't know where we went.
They have about 10 seconds before their
Okay.
their groups close now. So I'm sure, like our group, it just didn't seem like enough time.
Yeah.
There we go. Everybody's back.
Kim, did you want me to just jump in, or did you want to say something again? I'm sorry.
I think just because we're running just a couple minutes late, we're actually almost spot on. But Johanna, if it's okay with you, can we go on without debriefing right now?
Yes, I just want to say how meaningful the conversations were, and thank you to the people in my room for sharing from deep in their hearts. It was amazing to hear what's been on your minds. Thank you.
Thanks so much, and I echo that with a full heart. Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, in the last 10 years as a hospital chaplain, I've been in the CCU daily. I've accompanied probably thousands of families through the complex, kind of painful, sometimes painful medical decision-making that comes at the end of life. And I've sat in countless family meetings with doctors and families over those years. So I've seen the struggles to make good decisions and how much better families do when they have had these conversations ahead of time. So the first thing I want to say is, you know, good for all of you for sitting in for your sake and the sake of your families, just having these conversations now. The whole point, if you think about it, is to have these conversations or complete these documents like an advance directive or POLST, which we'll introduce you to in the next couple of weeks, ahead of time before you need them. Because if you wait until you need them, by definition, you've waited too long. That's right, you do directions in advance, hence advance directive. That's the whole idea. So do them before you need them while you're perfectly healthy, because none of us really has any guarantees about what will be happening next for us. So I've seen how much it protects families from pain. It can spare them from guilt. Did I make the right decision? What did mom really want? What would have been best? It can spare their relationships with each other because they often don't agree. Let me tell you, if you have children, they often don't agree and usually don't all agree about what should be done. And so, but they can often come together around what they know mom wanted to have done or what dad would have said to them if he were in the room. And so you can protect your family by having these conversations ahead of time and with them, because they will disagree. I would say a word about, you know, we don't like to have these conversations because, oh, it's kind of so serious or it's the end of life, I'm not going to die. But the fact that maybe these conversations are hard, or that some of your families don't want to have the conversations, is precisely the reason you should have them now, if you think about it. It's exactly the reason why you should. Because if they're difficult now, just think for a moment, imagine how much more difficult do you imagine those conversations would be when everyone is stressed, you're in a major health crisis, everything feels like it's hanging in the balance, emotions are high, and people can't think clearly. Because if we don't have the conversations ahead of time, you're defaulting to that as an option. And that's what I see happening every day, because we haven't had these conversations to really express our wishes. So what we do want to do is help you exert a measure of control over what you can control in this process, and to express your wishes ahead of time, your values, to get some clarity on that. It can help you by putting them down in writing. But the most important thing is to talk with each other. So the idea is that by talking ahead of time, then you're empowering others, or you're writing down in a document things that reflect your wishes, so that those things, those documents, or your family can speak for you when perhaps you're no longer able to speak for yourself. So in the next few minutes, what I want to do is I want to explain the process of sharing the decision-making process with physicians, because often that's the case. So I'll just give a quick diagram for that. I want to offer you some tools and resources that are very practical, which we've sent out to you, and I'll just highlight a couple of them as we go, and then we're going to give you a little bit of practice having these conversations in a breakout session. So I want to start with this one. So you've all seen this. You don't have to look at the printed copy. I'm going to encourage you just to look at your screen, because it'll be a little more clear. This is an excellent resource from End of Life Washington, which again is a website you should be familiar with. This is one of the tools that you can use to sit down with your family and kind of, there's 5 common representative kind of worst case scenarios. And it's like, what would you want done? Are you sure this, that? And then you can compare notes with each other. So I want to look just at number 4 here and imagine, so you have congestive heart failure that causes your lungs to fill up with fluid. Your health is poor and you're unable to walk around 1 block. You're always short of breath and tired all the time, but you are alert and able to enjoy time with family and friends. One day you have a heart attack and your heart stops beating. Would you want CPR started and 911 called? So what's your answer for yourself? Is yes, I would want CPR, no, or gosh, I'm not sure. Each of you will have an answer. Different members of your family might have a different answer to that question. So what I want to do is just work with this as an example, and then we'll look into the medical decision-making process. So let's imagine this has already happened. So this has already happened. They've called 911. You're now in critical care in a hospital. You're intubated with a tube down your throat. You cannot speak for yourself. And now the doctor is sitting down with your family in a family meeting. So the doctor's there, your family's there, the nurse, the social worker, and of course, hooray, the chaplain is there. And the doctor explains that, hey, congestive heart failure is a progressive illness. It's going to continue to gradually get worse over time. That's what it does. And you've had 1 heart attack that has damaged your heart. You're likely to have another heart attack at some point in the future. And if they can get you home from this hospitalization, your overall health is going to be somewhat worse than what it was earlier. Probably a little greater shortness of breath, a little more tired at the very least. And so the doctor asks your family as they're sitting there this question. Let's imagine it was me, this was my congestive heart failure, my heart attack. And he would say something like, hey, how was Jeff's quality of life before this episode? What was he able to do? And so you would have discussion around that together as my family. And then the doctor might ask you a question like this. He said, well, did Jeff ever talk with you about what he'd want you to do if his health condition got worse than what it was? For instance, if he was no longer able to walk around the house on his own, or he were dependent on Shannon. And those are the kinds of conversations that families have all the time. What will you say in a situation like that? Like, if it were you in that situation, not me, would your family know your wishes? Would they know how to respond and represent, what would be important to you? Do you know your own wishes? Would you know your family's wishes? Your mother or father's or your spouse's? Have you ever had these kind of conversations? Now, this is just one representative example of the kind of way that decisions will unfold. Now, I want to take a step back, and Kim has put up a diagram on the screen for us. And I want to talk with you about the process of making medical treatment decisions and introduce you to a shared decision-making process with a physician. This is just another kind of conversation. And my hope is to clarify what the doctor can offer and what we need to bring into that conversation. So as you're looking at this, this is on 1A, you'll see in the top left, what's the medical treatment being given or considered? That's what the doctor brings. That's their expertise. Together, when you're sharing the decision-making, you have to bring 1B, which is that top right column. It says, what are the patient's, the family members, or yours, your spouse's long-term quality of life goals? What would the patient want? What would they hate? What could they live with, even if they didn't like it? Like, hey, doctor, if we can get to this level of function, that would be okay with my mom. And so that's what I'm really focusing us on, and that's what I want to give us tools for, to really look at this area where we can get some clarity about, hey, what are our values? What is important to us? What makes life meaningful and worth fighting for? And the key question in number 2, you see in the middle there, is, does the medical treatment that the doctor can offer have a reasonable chance of achieving the patient's long-term goals or quality of life goals, which is what we need to bring into that conversation. And so then the triage is pretty simple. If the answer is yes, hey, there's a reasonable medical chance of getting back to this level of function that I know would be important to my spouse, then yes, you do it, you continue treatment. If the answer is no, there's not a reasonable chance of getting back to that quality of life goal, then you stop treatment, or you withhold, you withdraw treatment. If the answer is maybe, and often it's maybe, they're not sure, then maybe you do a time-limited trial treatment. So let's try it for a week, or let's give us a little more time, and let's try this, and we'll reevaluate and we'll talk again. So this is a simple shorthand version of the medical decision-making process, which families have every day. And I like it because it's simple. It's laden with a lot more going on, but the key thing is to pay attention to this upper right quadrant 1B, and that is, hey, what are our goals, values, what's important to me? Because that's what we've got to be able to bring in to the conversation. Otherwise, you're at the mercy of just throwing the book at somebody and doing everything because we can, even though it may not really reflect what you'd like to have done. Does that make sense? So what I want to do now is introduce you to some different tools that just help you assess that. So you'll see a values worksheet. We've sent this out to you. Page 1 is this, just a series of things like, hey, is this very important to you or not important to you? You could print these out, do them together with your family or people you care about, and just have conversation around these things. And take us to page 2, if you would, Kim. And at the top of this, scroll up to the very first question, if you can find it, which says, what will be important to you when you're dying? So this is just a series of questions that will invite you to have conversations with each other. And you may not have thought about many of these items, but what would be important to you when you're dying? So one of the hats I wore in the hospital was I would do new employee training and orientation, and I would provide, and my team would provide education on advanced directive documents and POLST documents for all of our nurses. And I would frequently tell them a story about my own conversations with my wife, Shannon, about this question and all these kinds of issues. And I remember I told the nurses, you know, I was asking Shannon once, hey, when you're dying, honey, who's in the room? Like, paint the picture. So she did. I said, do you want anyone there? Or would you rather kind of be alone? So I know she's kind of private. And she said, you know, do you want anyone in the room? Shannon's like, no, not really. I don't want my friends to be there. Our dog could be there with me. I would like that. I'd like to have the dog there. I paused. I said, well, anyone else? No, not really. I said, how about your husband? And oh yeah, you can be there too. That's okay. I said, well, good. I'm done. At least I know my place. And we just laughed together. And you know, these don't have to be all serious conversations. You know, you can be playful. You'll learn about each other. There are opportunities to discover each other in deeper ways. I've had these conversations with our teenage and now adult young sons to spare them guilt. We talk often about these issues, and we'll just be going through life or listening to something on NPR, and Shannon and I might turn to each other and say, hey, what would you want if? Because we've just heard another scenario presented to us and we've never talked about it. So hey, if that was us, what would you want? Because we've had these conversations, I know some things that are important to Shannon at the end of her life that I would never have thought of before. I know, for instance, lip care is very important to her, and oral care is very important to her. And I would have never known that unless we'd had that conversation. So you'll discover things about each other. I want to introduce you to one final tool, which you'll use next for your breakout sessions. And this is an opportunity to just practice having conversation briefly around your quality of life goals. So this is another series of questions I gave you, deciding your quality of life goals. And it asks a couple questions. What conditions would you find horrible to live with long term? What would be a fate worse than death? And most of us have that line in the sand somewhere that says, just don't put me through that. That would be too much. I don't want that. And I've given you a few examples. And another question is, what conditions, maybe health limitations or declines in health or function, would you be willing to live with even if you didn't like it? You know, so maybe, are you in a wheelchair? Is that acceptable if you still have cognitive function? Like, nah, I don't know what. So think about these questions. These are common kinds of questions. What would be your quality of life goals? And what I'd like to do is, we're going to give you about 10 minutes in your breakout sessions just to discuss those two questions together. There's no right or wrong answer. There's just your answer. And it's really just your answer as of today, because as you continue to think about it, your answer may change over time. That would be pretty common and very normal. So Kim will break us into groups, and when we come back, we'll have a quick check-in with each other. I'm always like the number one student here. I'm always so obedient. This is like me. This will be like me at the end of life, meeting all the boxes, right? Shannon is not the box person at all. Here we come. We may have time to open it up for some questions. So if you have questions or thoughts, just you could be thinking. Amanda, I just want to say nice to meet you. I understand maybe next week you're on, right? So it's a pleasure to meet you face to face.
As much as we can these days, right?
Yes.
I think maybe they're not realizing that, I don't know if she set them to end automatically or if they're,
She gave us a little prompt note.
yeah.
So I sure appreciate Kim's technical support. I mean, she just keeps us running.
It's great to have someone running that part.
Yeah, I tried doing a screen share in my kind of talking points earlier today, and I waved the white flag of surrender, and I said to the text, I said, hey, Kim, I cannot drive the car and talk at the same time, and I definitely cannot screen share and talk at the same time. So everybody's saying, please, could you do it? And she's like, oh, sure, Jeff, no problem. So, hey, while we're here, what we're going to do in the next session is just open it up for any questions. So while we're waiting for others to come back and join us, are there any questions around the circle here? Just unmute yourself or put a hand up and fire away. Or just a comment. Yeah, Greg, go ahead.
So Jeff, this is a comment. I shared this with Johanna and ours, but it's just a comment based on what you were sharing earlier. And just to share that as the profession of mediation has grown, like many other things, there are mediators, and I have one who works for me, who have focused their practice on mediating end-of-life conversations among families when it becomes very difficult, and even with families and healthcare providers in some really difficult situations. So yeah. I think there are resources out there, again, even in that very specific context.
And you have someone in your team, Greg,
Yes.
who does that?
Yeah.
Marvelous. Boy, what a gift. Physicians are not trained to have those conversations. And so they're often not skilled, to be honest, which is where a chaplain often or a social worker will have far more training in how to have these kind of nuanced, difficult, emotionally laden conversations. So the fact that you have someone on your team is such a gift.
Yeah.
So important. Other questions while we're waiting for others to join us? Feel free, if you have a question or a comment, just feel free to raise a hand and jump in. And Kim, you can let us know. I know you're the keeper of time, so I'm going to let you tell us we're right about where we need to stop. Looks like we have one more group we're waiting for, though.
Yeah, their group closed, so they should be rejoining us really shortly. And Jeff, I think it's okay if we run over with like four minutes. So I'll make my my part of telling what's happening really short and quick.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and take 4 minutes to debrief once people are here.
Yeah, so just wanted to hear from people if you know how that went for you. What was that like for you, talking about those kind of hairy situations? Was it challenging? Was it natural? Any surprises or any questions? So if so, just put a hand up and just kind of briefly weigh in with each other.
Challenging, not natural, interesting, difficult. Blah.
Blah. Thanks, Daphne. Somebody else.
Way to go, Daphne. Well,
Questions? Other comments? What was that like
Well-
for you? Is that Pat or
Jill.
Jill? Go ahead, Jill, and then Pat, I think, looks like she's on.
Okay, well, I said that I didn't want to lose myself by living without, especially with Alzheimer's or something like that. And Marty, I think it was Marty who was with us, he said, maybe you're better than you think you are, something like that. Maybe it would be better that way. We all got a good laugh out of that. It's nice to be able to have a good attitude about this whole business.
Absolutely.
But I think that would be, I don't really want to have Alzheimer's. I don't think I'd be very happy that way.
Yeah, there is a fair degree of consensus around among us as well.
Yeah.
Pat, did you have something you wanted to add into the mix? I'm seeing Pat O'Rourke. I'm not sure if that's your name. Unmute yourself, dear.
So I was surprised at a couple of things. The very first thing you did where there were 5 scenarios, you of course picked the one scenario that just totally confuses me and baffles me. I mean, when I had read those ahead of time, and that was what I found in some of these other things as well. Some stuff seems so clear to me, and other stuff is like, and I know it. That's why I'm here. I know that.
That's why I chose it, right? Because it's like,
yeah. It's like because there can be certain things that just seem very clear to us, and yet we all know that when the time comes, and it's a lot more complicated. So we do have to have the questions and the conversations ahead of time.
Yeah. My encouragement is just to be as clear as you can, like to be clear on what is clear and what you know now, and just keep talking with each other. And some things will become more clear over time. There's no way to prepare for all the different scenarios, but as we talk with each other, then we know better how to support each other and how love can show up, and how to respect each other. Greg?
I think that, the challenge for me in making these decisions is making the decision that you want, as opposed to making the decision that you think others want.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, as you think about this process, but particularly many of us are here with partners or spouses, is that, how individual is that decision in this moment? Is this my decision? Is this our decision? I mean, where do you, I guess navigating that becomes a challenge.
For sure. And I've literally had some situations where the medical decision maker was not the wife and not the husband, because they had talked about it ahead of time and they knew they would be too emotional to do what the spouse wanted done. And so they made it a friend, and they both agreed and they signed on the dotted line. So just knowing each other and being honest with each other, I think, is a gift. So, because it's really about trying to honor the wishes, like your wishes in this case, and who's able to do that. That's a challenge. Any other observations, Marcy?
We brought up the muddy situation where the prognosis is uncertain.
Yeah.
Or unknown, and these horrible things, having somebody have to feed you and deal with all of your daily hygiene. I wouldn't want that as a long-term thing, but if it's something where okay, for a month, I need that done, that's fine. But none of this is ever that predictable. So it's so clear when you get into some of that arena, decision-making is going to have to continue to be amended on the spot as you progress through whatever the condition is, if you are still conscious enough, which is why you're convincing me I need a really long conversation with my spouse. This isn't just a black and white thing. This is talking about all kinds of scenarios and the fact that things evolve.
Yeah. And as our health changes and as our capacities change, our answers may change. And so in my experience, it's not any one conversation. We just keep talking with each other and sharing those conversations and normalize. I think to the extent, like, especially with kids, I found that if the adults in the room are okay, the kids are going to be okay. They're very resilient creatures. And so if we are able to hold ourselves together and like model for them how to have these conversations in a healthy way, they will learn how to do it. And they'll learn from watching us, for better or for worse. So again, a good reason to just do our best and kind of normalize it. And even be a little playful with it at times. So it doesn't have to be all, deathly serious. All right, Kim, we should probably, I want to be respectful of time. So I don't know if there are any other comments, but I want you to have the time you need to wrap things up.
Well, I do want to start wrapping things up. We're just a couple minutes over. So if you do need to leave, please go ahead and do that at 8:30. We still have you for 3 more minutes. So we'll try to put a lot into the last 3 minutes. I'm going to just describe quickly what's coming up. And then I will ask Flory to introduce herself and say a few words about pastoral care at Grace. And then I'll ask our rector, Ren, to pray us out, as they used to say in my childhood church. So next week, we'll be talking about questions of care. Shannon will be going in depth into palliative care, and specifically we'll be filling out the PULSE, or talking about and filling out the PULSE document. We'll be talking about death with dignity. And let's see, Amanda, do you want to wave, Amanda? There she is, if you can see her. Amanda is a lawyer, and she's going to be helping us think about and go through advanced care directives from that point of view as well. And then the week after, we'll be going into hospice. We will have a visitor and his colleague from Multi-Care Hospice coming to visit us and talking about hospice. We'll also have some different people from Grace joining us, and we'll be talking about funerals as well and finances. So we're packing a lot into every week. And finally, our last session, which is right around Thanksgiving, is about having difficult conversations with your family. So taking everything that we've talked about and work through, and then taking it to your virtual or in-person Thanksgiving table. So I am deeply, deeply grateful for our moderators today and in future weeks to come. I just think this has been an incredibly rich time, and it's been an amazing privilege to be with all of you. Flory, could you please say some words about pastoral care at Grace?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Kim. And it has been an incredibly rich evening. And thanks to all of you for being here, and for Jeff and Shannon and Johanna. You've been great and given us a lot to think about over the next week. I'm on the pastoral care team at Grace, and Kim asked me to say a few words about what end-of-life resources we have through pastoral care at Grace. And we have many. And they are really the very heart of our pastoral care practice at Grace. And these resources tend to fall into 2 categories, the tangible and the intangible. And among the tangible offerings that could help you or a loved one who's approaching an end-of-life time include the gift of a hand-knit prayer shawl made by our Knitting Into the Mystery group, putting your name on the Grace prayer list, having the company of a Grace companion, who is someone who's trained to listen and journey with you during this transition. We also have a support group called Compassionate Caring. And we're blessed with 2 gifted compassionate priests, Ren and Stephen, who can both provide spiritual counseling. We may talk more about this at other sessions, but I wanted to make sure that you're aware that Grace has a memorial service form that you can fill out. This is mine, and file it in the Grace office. Completing this form can be a wonderful gift to whoever will be planning your memorial service. It allows you to express your wishes for the music, scripture, poetry, speakers, and the liturgy that you wish to have at your memorial. There's a copy of this form on the website under pastoral care, or you can call the office or email the office and ask them to send you a copy. And after you filled it out, you're invited to have a memorial planning meeting with Ren or Stephen to go over the form. Grace can also assist you with planning and hosting a reception in Walker Hall after a memorial service. So the clergy and the pastoral care team can also help connect you with community resources outside of Grace, such as lists of in-home caregivers or caregiving agencies, meal delivery services, obtaining medical equipment, and referrals to other professionals and services. When I asked the pastoral care team how we help people during their end-of-life journeys, they talked about the intangibles. They said, we try to be aware of what's happening in our community. And then if asked, we show up with open hearts, willing to serve. One person recalled a time when she brought dinner to a home where a family member was very ill. She thought she would simply be providing a pot of soup. Instead, she was invited into the home to share some of the last moments of a loved one's life, experiencing sacred space, as she put it. That's an example of what showing up with an open heart, willing to serve, looks like. Every Sunday bulletin at Grace states on page 1, ministers, all of us. And that's true. It's not only the pastoral care team and the clergy who act during end-of-life times, it's all of us who feel moved to show up with open hearts, ready and willing to serve, both by giving and by receiving. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you for being with us. Let's pray. God, our times are in your hands. Tonight, we entrust to you all that is unresolved, our fears, our hopes, our longings, our challenges. And we ask that you keep watch and you hold those and give us the gift of rest. Keep watch with those who work or watch or weep this night, O God, and give your angels charge over those who sleep. Tend the sick, give rest to the weary, bless the dying, soothe the suffering, pity the afflicted, shield the joyous, and all for your love's sake. Amen.
Go in peace, friends.
Thank you so much. See you next week.